Hello guys and welcome back. This is episode 2. So in the first episode we have imported Express. Express is a package. It's a back-end web application framework for Node.js to make creating APIs easier. We have also created an Express application. We have added a middleware to parse JSON data. We have also created one API which is of type get. The method type is get. We have set the endpoint to students. And then here we are responding, so the response is this student's object that we have created, the student variable that we have created, which is an array of JSON objects. And then we have listened to the port 3000, so we are listening to incoming requests on that port. And we have also talked about a package called nodemon, which refreshes and restarts the application each time we save, so that we don't have to waste time by stopping and then running the server again. So today in this video what we're gonna do is we're gonna separate our application into different folders to make it more organized and more readable. So we're gonna have a router folder, a controller folder, and then a service folder, and I'm gonna explain the role of each. And we're also gonna be using the router given by the Express package, and you'll also see how we can remove the hard-coded part here. So we're gonna have this variable in an environment file, and then I'm going to explain why we do that. And then in the configuration we're going to be reading from the .env file, and then of course we're going to be using the configuration in our program instead of this hard-coded part here. So the first thing we want to do is create a new file, and it should be called .env. And then let's create our first variable, which is going to be port, and let's set it to 3000. Now I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it configurations, and we're going to have one file called config.js. Now we're going to be using the config.js variables, or the variables that we're going to place in this, in the server.js or anywhere else in the application. So for that we're going to have to export it to the outside, and to do that we need to say module.exports, and then equal. I'm going to open to create a JSON object. And then here I'm going to have a property or a key called port, and then I'm going to set the value process.env dot and then port. Why did we say that, or why did we use that name? It's because in our env file that's literally how we typed it, and be careful, it should be in the same capitalization. Now the next thing that we want to do is we're gonna install a package called .env. So let's do that. npm.env. Okay, my bad. npm install or npmi.env. And we need this package to be able to load the environment variables from our .env file right here. And this is to allow us to use this process.env.port command here. So after installing it, we need to import it, and we need to require it, so require, and then we need to type in the package name, which is .env, and then .config. Now if we save that, and we want to use it in our server, and again, since we have added this to module.exports, we're exporting it to the outside, and then here we need to import it. And to do that I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it config, and then now we need to require it, and we need to give it the path. So this is it now. Now with this config variable right here, we can access every object that we are exporting here, or every property that we have here actually, which is the port property here. So instead of 3000 now, I'm going to say config.port. And to be sure that it's working, instead of having it hard-coded here as well, I'm gonna come here and say plus and config.port. Let's save, and in here let's say nodemon server to run the server, and as you can see it says app listening on port 3000, and this time it's not hard-coded, it's reading from the config file, which the config file is reading from our env. Now usually the env file is very helpful, so that when you have different environments, such as you're working locally or you're working on a dev server, you're going to have different variables. So for example, a different connection string to your database, a different port, different things. So for those kind of stuff, or for example, app secrets and all those kind of variables that you need, we would put them in an environment variable, and then this .env file should be added to the get_ignore file, so that when you push to your cloud with your team, you should not push this env file. Only the config should be pushed. I hope it wasn't too complicated for you. If it was, I can keep a few links about environment variables in the description. You can let me know in the comments. Now let's start with the organization that we should follow. So far we have created one API with the route and then the function in one go, but now we're going to separate this into different folders. So we're going to have the routes folder where we're going to set every route, and then we're going to have this function right here be placed in a different folder in a controller, and then the controller is going to have different functions. So you might say that why should we do that? I mean, it's pretty simple here, but the thing is, as we go along and create more and more APIs, and we have more different object types, so for example now we have students, but then we might have schools, we might have addresses, we might have many different things, and you can think of those as collections in our MongoDB, and you will see that later on if you don't know about MongoDB much. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call it routes. And then let's create the first file. I'm going to say students.js. So in this students.js file inside of our routes, we're going to have every route for every API concerning the students. So here, the first thing I want to do is create an express, create a variable, and then we're going to require express. And then I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call it router, and then we're going to have to call the express.router function. Now what we can do is say router.get, and of course we also have router.post, router.put, and router.delete for every method type. So here our API was router.get, so I'm going to create the same one. I'm going to take the same route, but this time instead of having our function here, what we will do is we're going to have the function in a different file, in a controller folder, in a controller file as well. So we're going to be doing this right now. For now I'm going to keep it that way, and here I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call it controller. And then in this controller, of course, we're going to have a student.js file, and here we can have different ways, like we can create a class, and then this class has different methods. Each method is a function that takes 2 or 3 arguments: request, response, and then the next. And we can just create separate functions and then call them. It really doesn't matter which one you want to go with, but I'm going to go with the class approach. So here I'm going to say class, and I'm going to call it student controller. And then in this class, the first method I want to have is, let's say, since here we're returning students, as you have seen here, responsive set and students, I'm going to call it get students. So get students. And then here we're going to have our request, response, and next, which you're going to see. And now we can have the response.send, and here we're going to have our students. For now, of course, we have not created a students object to return, so I'm just going to keep it response send, or for example hello. And of course, to be able to use that controller outside this file, we need to add it to the export.modules here, and we need to specify the class name. And my bad, here it should be module.exports. Let's save that, and let's come back here, and now we need to import it. So let's say constant. I'm gonna say student controller. Of course, you can name this variable as you wish, but it would be a better convention to use the same class name. And then we need to require it. So let's do that right now. Require. Let's go to controller, then student controller. Since it's a class, if we want to use the methods in a class, we would need to create an instance of this class, and then using that instance we would call the method. Unless we had a static function, of course, then we would need to use the class name instead of an instance. So let's go back to our route, StudentRouter.js file, and then create an instance of that class. So I'm going to call it student controller. Of course, you can see the difference in the capitalization of the S. And then equal new, since we're creating a new instance of this class, new student controller. And now here, instead of creating the function just like we did in this server.js file, we're going to call this function right here, this method right here. So we're going to be using this instance that we just created and say student controller dot get students. And be careful here, we should not open and close the parentheses. We shouldn't do that. We just keep it like that. Now you might be asking yourselves, how are we going to get to this file? Like, we're running this file right here. Well, let me first comment this out. And then, of course, we need to export this so that we can use it from the outside. So let's say module.exports and then equal our router variable that we have just created, which comes from the router function on the Express. And now we can use it in here. So I'm going to say constant. I'm going to call it student routes or student router. And then let's require it. So let's give the path, which is routes / student. And now we need to add the middleware that goes to that route. So let's say app.use, and then here we're going to give it the router that we have just created. So now when the application starts and a request goes through that middleware, it will check for the route and for the method, and then if they both match, it will call this this get students method on the student controller class, and then the response would be sent back. Let's try this out. So I'm going to open that, and because we're using Node.js, I don't have to run it. It's already running. I don't have to stop it and then run it again. So let's go and open Postman. So I have Postman opened here, and now if we press on send, surely enough, it's still working. But this time we are using different folders. Feel free to slow down or replay some parts of the video if you feel like you're getting confused. But what we're doing basically is, instead of having this API with the route and the function, because then when we're going to be calling MongoDB queries and deleting stuff from the DB, it's going to get so messy if we have all the logic and everything in this. So what we did is we have separated our routes from our controller functions, where we take the request object and then we respond. And then instead of having direct responses here, we're going to be talking to a service. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a third folder, and we're going to call it services. And inside this, we're going to have the student.js file. And here again, I'm going to go with the class approach, but you can have different functions, of course, and export them all to be used outside. So I'm going to say class student service. And this class, typically what you need is we use the same name as here. So if you have a get students controller method, then we're going to have the same one in our service for students. So let's go back to services here and create one for the students. And here for now, we're not going to be talking with a database in this video. We're going to be doing that in the next episode, episode 3. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the object that we used to return here, the array. So I'm going to take it from here and then go to our services and return it here. So instead of doing that, I can just say return and have it that way. Now let's go back to our student controller, and then here I'm going to say, of course, first of all, we shouldn't forget that we should export this class to be able to use it outside. So let's say module.exports equal, and then the class name, which is student service. Now that we are exporting it, we can go back to our controller and import it here. So let's say constant student service equal require, and then let's get the path services slash student.js, and let's create an instance for that class. So constant student service, and the S should be capital, new student service. And now of course we can come here and create a variable. I'm gonna call it students equal, and we will be using our instance of the service class dot get students. And here, if you take a look, we're returning this array of JSON of different students in our case. So I'm gonna go back to the controller, and then here I'm gonna be returning students instead of hello. I'm gonna delete this, and now let's save. And if you go back to Postman and hit on send, as you can see, we are returning this array again. Typically here we would have all routes concerning the students. So for example, CRUD APIs, get student by ID, delete a student, all those routes related to student, and that's why we have the student.js file. So if we had other type of collections, we would create a different route with a different name. This will all make sense furthermore when we use a database in the next episode. And I want to show you one more thing. So let's say here we didn't want to use that. We wanted to say student or student slash get all, for example. And then let's say we had a delete API here, and instead of that we wanted to call it delete, like if you wanted to use that convention. As you can see, we are repeating student all the time. So instead of having student every time, what we can do is go back here where we are using or adding this router to our application, and we can pass in a first argument, which is slash student. In that case, now if you say that and I go back to our routes, I would just have to specify, for example, this get all, then remove this. So now don't get confused. What happens is that when a request comes in, and it will check this middleware, if the route doesn't start with student slash student, it would not even enter that router. It would just jump into the next middleware if we had more middlewares. But if it was student and it matched, it would go to our router and then try to match the full URL. So in this case now, after saving, if we go back here, we have slash student slash get all now, and if we press send, as you can see, it's still working. This is just something to keep in mind. This is gonna be it for this video. I hope you were able to understand. If you have any comments, please, or any questions, please don't hesitate. You can ask me anything in the comment section and I'll try to help. If it was helpful, please leave a like, subscribe, and wait for more videos like that. The next video, we're going to be using MongoDB. We're also going to learn how to validate. We're going to do CRUD APIs, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.